The late summer sun spread across Willow Springs Park in golden sheets, but something in the air felt off, like a radio left on static. The breeze carried faint laughter from the playground, but it died too quickly, smothered by a heavy stillness near the old elm tree at the far end. Emily Jacobs adjusted the sun hat over her blonde curls and glanced down at her 18-month-old son, Noah, toddling beside her. He gripped his stuffed giraffe in one hand, the other slightly raised as he tried to match her stride. Then he stopped, abruptly. "No?" Emily turned. Noah stood frozen, wide-eyed, pointing a chubby finger across the grass. His expression shifted, not to fear, but concern. He let out a soft sound, like a question without words. Emily followed his gaze. A loose crowd had formed around the old elm. Adults, parents, familiar faces from the neighborhood, but none of them smiling. Their backs were partially turned inward, forming a loose, uncomfortable half-circle. The kind of cluster that forms not to help, but to contain. Emily pushed the stroller closer, curious but cautious. And then she heard it. "That thing should be put down," muttered Mrs. Langford, the HOA treasurer, arms crossed. "It's been sitting there 3 days. What's it waiting for?" Noah's hand tightened around Emily's fingers. "I don't care what kind of dog it used to be," added Mr. Sloan, a retired high school coach. "It's dangerous. Look at those scars. That's a fighter if I ever saw one." Between their legs, near the base of the elm, lay a dog. No, not just a dog, a German shepherd. Massive, though clearly emaciated. Its fur was patchy, clumped with dirt, and streaked with what looked like old burns. One ear was mangled. A jagged scar split through the bridge of its nose. Its head was down, not in aggression, but in something quieter. Surrender. Noah let out a sharp cry and tried to pull away from his mother. "Hey, sweetie," Emily said, bending down, holding him close. "That dog might be hurt. We're going to stay right here, okay?" But Noah wasn't afraid. His eyes locked on the shepherd's, and his voice, barely more than a baby's babble, came out in a coo that felt deliberate. The dog stirred. Just slightly, its nose twitched, its clouded eyes flicked upward, and stopped. Right on Noah. Mrs. Langford's voice cut through again. "Someone said a teenager threw a soda can at it yesterday. Thing didn't even move, just stared. Creepy." "I'll call animal control again," someone else said. "It's a liability." Emily's stomach twisted. The shepherd's body language told her everything they weren't seeing. It wasn't threatening. It was trying to disappear. She had seen fear in animals before. This wasn't just fear. This was betrayal. "Doggy," Noah whispered, and pointed again. The shepherd's ears gave the faintest twitch. It blinked. And then, unbelievably, its tail gave a flick. Not a wag. Just a flick, like a dying ember catching a breath of wind. No, come on, we'll go see the ducks," Emily said quickly, already pivoting the stroller away. But Noah twisted in his seat, tears welling. Da, doggy!" The crowd began to thin, like smoke from a fire that had lost its heat. But Emily turned to look one last time. The shepherd hadn't moved. Still tucked under the tree, pressed low to the ground, ribs showing, eyes watching only one thing. Her son. They walked away. But something had shifted. Emily didn't know it yet. Not fully. But a line had been drawn, silent and invisible, between a baby who hadn't yet learned fear, and a dog who had known nothing else for far too long. That night, as Emily laid Noah into his crib, he reached for her, his baby voice soft and insistent. "Doggy, cold." "What?" she whispered. He touched his own arm, made a shivering sound. "Doggy, cold." Emily stared at him, heart pinched. The image flashed back. Those eyes, the stillness, the crushed dignity in the way the shepherd seemed to brace for hate before it even came. She tucked the blanket tighter around her son, but her thoughts stayed with the dog. In the shadows under that elm tree, something was still waiting, watching. And a baby, barely learning words, had seen more truth than every adult in the park combined. Tomorrow, something would change, and it would start not with a grown-up's command, but with a toddler's stubborn heart. By the time morning light seeped through the kitchen blinds, Emily had already been up for an hour. She sipped lukewarm coffee at the counter, scrolling half-heartedly through emails, though her thoughts kept drifting to the tree, and the dog, and her son. Noah had woken up twice in the night, not crying, not calling for her, but murmuring one word each time in his baby voice, soft and full of something she couldn't name. Doggy. Emily wasn't a bleeding heart. She donated to the shelter, sure. Once a year she even bought those rescue calendars with golden retrievers in firefighter hats. But stray dogs? Big ones? Ones with scars and cloudy eyes? That was a different matter. Still, there was something about the way Noah had looked at that animal. Not curious, not scared, as if they already knew each other. She shook it off. There were errands to run. They walked to the park again, part of the morning loop. Emily didn't intend to go near the elm. But Noah had other plans. The moment they reached the edge of the playground, he twisted in the stroller, pointed straight ahead, and said with clarity that startled her. Doggy. Noah, let's go to the swings first. She tried, adjusting the strap. Doggy now. He rarely spoke in complete demands. But there it was. Emily sighed. Okay, just a peek. As they turned the corner near the maintenance shed, she caught sight of a familiar figure crouched low near the tree. Her breath caught, the German. Shepherd was still there. But something was different. The way he lay today, it wasn't just tired, it was limp. His body looked heavier, like gravity had taken over. His head rested against the tree root, tongue barely visible between cracked lips. His ribs were sharper now, as if the skin had forgotten how to hide them. And he wasn't alone. Beside him was a paper bag, soaked through with oil stains, torn open, the smell of fried food thick in the air. Emily blinked. Then she saw the trail of French fries, some half-eaten, some stomped into the dirt. A few had landed near the dog's front paw. One had a footprint on it. Noah leaned forward in the stroller and let out a sound of distress. Doggy sick. Emily stepped closer, heart ticking faster. Noah, stay here, she said, locking the stroller wheels. As she approached, the shepherd stirred, barely. One eye opened halfway. No growl, no flinch, just a slow shift of the head, like every movement cost more than he could afford. Hey there, buddy, she said quietly, crouching 10 feet away. The shepherd didn't move. Emily noticed now that his left foreleg was swollen, crusted with blood near the paw. Puncture wounds, not from a fight. More like something jagged, broken glass, a trap. She suddenly felt sick. Behind her, Noah was squirming to get free. Doggy hurt, he cried. That's when the twist came. A man's voice, loud and casual, called from the far end of the green. Still here, huh, Mutt? Emily turned sharply. A teenage boy, 17, maybe 18, walked toward them with a half-smirk. Baseball cap turned backwards. He carried a bike helmet dangling from one hand. Didn't figure you'd still be alive after what I gave you yesterday. Emily stood up straight, every nerve alert. Excuse me? The teen shrugged, unbothered. I just tossed him some food. Not my fault if he can't chew. But his tone said otherwise. Are you saying you fed this dog yesterday? Fed? But maybe tested him a little. Just a stick or two. That thing didn't even bark, like a ghost. Emily's jaw clenched. You hurt him? Lady, it's a stray. Probably full of rabies. Should be put down. She moved toward him before she realized her feet were even stepping. Get out of here. The boy's grin faded. Fine. Have fun with your zombie dog. He turned and walked away. Emily exhaled sharply and knelt back down. The shepherd hadn't reacted, but his eyes were open now, watching her, watching Noah. Then, slowly, carefully, the dog shifted. It wasn't much, just a slight movement of his head toward Noah's voice. But it was deliberate. It was recognition. Emily felt something crack in her chest. She took off her sweater, folded it in half, and laid it on the ground 3 feet away from the dog. Here, she whispered. Something soft. Noah was still calling. Doggy, come home. The shepherd didn't respond, but the smallest sound, a thump of a tail against dirt, came after. Emily scooped Noah into her arms and backed away, her heart full of knots. They didn't come to the park for the rest of the day. But by sunset, she was Googling what to do with injured stray dogs, signs of trauma in German shepherds, and can toddlers sense emotions in animals? The results didn't help. But the next morning, she packed a boiled egg, a bottle of water, and a bandage kit into her tote bag. She had no plan, only one unshakable truth. Something was broken under that elm tree, and her baby saw it before anyone else, and that meant they couldn't walk away anymore. The next morning broke clear and cool, the kind of September air that made Willow Springs feel gentler, quieter. But Emily didn't feel any of that. Her nerves were raw. She hadn't told anyone about what happened in the park the day before. Not the boy with the smirk, not the wound on the dog's leg, not the way her toddler had spoken about the German shepherd in his sleep again, whispering soft, urgent sounds like hurt and cold. Noah stood at the back door, arms outstretched toward the yard, his tone insistent. Go find Doggy? Emily hesitated, holding the tote bag heavier than it looked. Inside were 2 hard-boiled eggs, a towel, gauze, a tiny water dish, and a handful of cereal Noah had insisted on packing, for sharing. She had no answers to give him. She only knew she had to go back. When they arrived at the park, she didn't head toward the swings or benches. She walked with purpose, past the climbing gym, around the trash bins, until the old elm came into view. The dog was gone. Her chest tightened. The patch of dirt where he'd curled yesterday was still marked by his body, the depression clear, the surrounding leaves flattened. But he wasn't there. No, she whispered, scanning the green space like someone looking for a dropped wallet. No, no, no. Noah let out a soft sound and pointed. Emily followed his tiny finger. At the far end of the field, down near the maintenance shed, lay a long shadow, grey and still. The shepherd had moved, or maybe dragged himself. She ran. As she reached him, her fears doubled. The dog lay on his side, panting. Not rapid, but laboured. His eyes fluttered open. He didn't lift his head. Hey, boy, she whispered, kneeling beside him. He blinked slowly, his body twitching once, then going still again. Emily poured water into the bowl. Noah came up behind her and knelt too, unprompted. Doggy, drink? She inched the bowl forward. The shepherd didn't move, but then, after an agonizing pause, his nose twitched. One paw shifted, and he slowly, shakily, pushed himself upright enough to lap at the water once, then again. Emily exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. There you go, easy. She offered the egg next, cracked and peeled. He sniffed it, then took it in his mouth and chewed with slow, deliberate motions, like someone savoring a memory more than the meal itself. Noah reached out, his small hand landing gently on the shepherd's paw. Emily started to pull him back, but stopped. The shepherd's gaze flicked to Noah's face, and held. That was when she noticed it. The dog's collar. It was barely visible beneath the matted fur, faded, cracked leather that had once been brown. She leaned closer. There was no tag, no engraving, but something about the collar was off. It was too tight, not choking tight, but deliberate, restrictive, and old. She pulled a pocket knife from the tote and gently touched the edge to the collar. The shepherd didn't flinch. He let her cut through it. It came free with a quiet snap. She turned the inside out. Burned into the leather was a number. Not a name. A number. Faint, but there. K9 713 B. She froze. A police ID. She stared at it. 100 thoughts fought for space in her head. This wasn't a stray. This dog had once worn a badge. "Mommy?" Noah whispered, his voice curious. Emily tucked the collar into the bag, mind racing. Who would abandon a trained K9? Who would let a working dog end up like this? Before she could untangle the implications, a voice called from behind her. "There you are." Emily turned. An older man, mid-60s, approached with a paper bag in one hand and a walking cane in the other. He had a weathered face, white mustache, faded army cap. "I've been looking for this dog," he said. Emily stood. "You know him?" The man stopped a few feet away, scanning the shepherd's body like someone taking inventory of damage. His voice was careful, guarded. "I think I do." He crouched with difficulty, wincing at his knees. Then he looked the dog square in the eye. "Shadow?" he asked softly. At the name, the shepherd's ears moved. Then his head lifted, and something broke in his face. Recognition. He tried to rise fully. Failed. Let out a sound that wasn't a bark or a whine, just a hoarse, aching breath. The man's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my boy," he murmured, voice cracking. "What the hell happened to you?" Emily crouched beside him. "You're his owner?" "No," the man said. "I was his partner." He extended a trembling hand, resting it on the dog's chest. "My name's Walter Griggs, retired K9 handler. Shadow and I served together for 8 years. We were separated 2 years ago. He went missing while I was in treatment." Cancer Emily glanced down at the shepherd. Someone said he was stray, that he was dangerous. Walter shook his head slowly. "He was the gentlest dog I ever knew. Saved 3 kids in one summer. I don't know how he ended up here. Like this." Emily hesitated, then handed him the cut collar. Walter held it like it was gold. Or a gravestone. "I knew it. They said he ran off, but I never believed it. Shadow wouldn't just leave." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone took him." Emily's pulse quickened. "Why would anyone steal a K9? "Because he's valuable," Walter said grimly. "Because some people don't care what they destroy if they can profit from it." Noah reached out again, resting his tiny hand on the shepherd's back. Walter looked at him with something close to awe. "Your son brought him back to life," he said softly. "You have no idea what that means." Emily didn't answer. She was still staring at the number burned into the collar. K9 713. She didn't know what came next, but something told her the real story behind this dog, this partner, was only just beginning. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat curled on the edge of her couch, blanket draped across her shoulders, watching the baby monitor blink in soft blue. In the adjacent room, Noah slept peacefully. On the rug in front of her, the German shepherd, Shadow, lay still, wrapped in an old quilt. Every so often, his breath hitched in his chest, as if dreams still chased him. Walter Griggs sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed on the dog. He hadn't spoken in over 20 minutes, not since whispering, I never thought I'd see him again. The only sound was the clock ticking, and the occasional scrape of Shadow's paw twitching in his sleep. You really think he was taken? Emily finally asked. Walter looked up. His eyes were tired, but clear. I don't think. I know. Shadow didn't just vanish one morning. The officer who was watching him for me while I was getting chemo said Shadow ran off during a thunderstorm, but there was no sign of forced exit. The fence was intact. No prints, no trail, nothing. Just gone. He ran a hand over his face. I filed a report, pushed every contact I had in the department, but without proof, without witnesses, nothing stuck. Emily sat up straighter. You think that officer sold him? Walter didn't answer at first. He just looked at Shadow, then at Noah's bedroom door. I think someone realized how valuable a dog like Shadow could be, and they didn't care who got hurt along the way. A pause. Emily swallowed. What kind of valuable? Walter's jaw tightened. Shadow was trained beyond standard narcotics detection. He could track missing persons by scent. He once found a girl in a drainage culvert 2 towns over. He's the kind of dog that criminals would pay good money for, either to use or to keep out of law enforcement's hands. Emily glanced down at the dog. But he wouldn't cooperate. No, Walter said, but some people don't need cooperation, just obedience or fear. A chill ran down her spine. The silence broke with a knock at the door. Sharp, aggressive. Walter stood up, stepping between the door and the rug. Emily peeked through the window. Mr. Rawlings, the building manager. She opened the door a crack. He didn't smile. Miss Jacobs, he said, scanning the room behind. Her. Is it true you're harboring a stray? A large dog? Emily bristled. Excuse me. Someone from the neighborhood called. He said. Said you brought home a dangerous animal from the park. I've had 3 complaints this evening. You know this building doesn't allow pets. This isn't a pet. He's injured. He was dying. Be that as it may, Rawlings said, shifting his weight. If he's not gone by tomorrow morning, I'll have to contact animal control. Policy is policy. Emily stared at him. You're threatening to remove a wounded canine. Rawlings looked surprised. A what? Walter stepped forward. This dog served 8 years on the force. His name is Shadow. He's not a stray. He's my partner. Rawlings opened his mouth to protest, but faltered under Walter's stare. Morning, Walter said, voice low and calm. That gives us time. Rawlings hesitated, then turned and walked down the hall. Emily closed the door slowly. Walter's words hung in the air. That gives us time. But for what? The next day, Emily called in sick. She didn't care what her boss thought. She dropped Noah at her sister's house, claiming errands. Then she returned with Walter to the park. They didn't bring Shadow. He needed rest. But Walter needed something else. Proof. They started at the maintenance shed. Then the alley behind the equipment lot. Then finally, Walter pointed at the park's lone security camera, half hidden behind an old streetlight. Emily's eyes widened. You think it caught something? I think if Shadow was dumped or hurt here, someone brought him in. Maybe late, maybe fast. But someone did. And if that camera works, it may have seen. By noon, they were at the Parks Department office, speaking to a clerk named Jenna who didn't seem to care until Walter slid his badge across the counter. Retired, but still official. An hour later, they were watching shaky footage from 3 nights ago. A black SUV pulled up near the service entrance. 2 men exited, opened the rear door, and, there, Walter said, standing. Pause it. The screen showed a limp figure being dragged and dropped near the base of the elm. Emily's hand covered her mouth. Can you enhance the plates? Walter asked. Jenna squinted. I can try. The timestamp is clear, though. 2:14 a.m., Monday. Do you have any of the next morning? Emily asked suddenly. They skipped ahead. 7:03 a.m., a teenager rode into frame on a bike. Same backward cap. Same smug body language. That's him, Emily whispered. The one who bragged about hurting the dog. Walter was quiet. Then he turned to Jenna. Print this. That evening, they returned to Emily's apartment. She opened the door cautiously. Shadow was sitting upright. He had pulled himself to the rug by the door. His ears perked the moment they entered. Walter dropped to his knees, smiling through exhaustion. There you are, soldier! Shadow let out a soft, gravelly sound. Not quite a whine, not quite a bark. Walter touched his chest. You're safe now, but they're not going to stop. Not until we figure out who took you, and why. As if in answer, Shadow leaned forward and rested his head against Walter's shoulder. Emily watched them both. For the first time in days, she felt something shift. Not fear. Focus. Whatever had happened to this dog, it wasn't over. But now they were finally fighting back. Together. The silence in Emily's apartment was heavy. Shadow lay curled on the worn rug, one paw stretched forward, his head resting on it like a soldier between battles. The bandages on his leg were cleaner now. His ribs still showed, but the trembling had eased. His eyes followed every movement, calm, watchful, but never fully at rest. Emily stood by the window, holding a mug of tea gone cold. Walter leaned against the kitchen counter, flipping through a manila folder Jenna had managed to pull together for them. There wasn't much. A grainy still shot of the SUV's license plate, partial at best, and two blurry faces half obscured by hoodies. Not enough for an arrest, but enough to confirm one thing. This wasn't random, Walter said quietly. They knew who he was, where to leave him, and that no one would ask questions. Emily nodded slowly. But why now? Walter hesitated, then said, because maybe someone talked. Maybe someone slipped. Or maybe they just didn't need him anymore. Shadow stirred, as if he understood. Emily set her mug down. You really think this is bigger than one dog? I think someone with access, someone inside, wanted him gone, and now they know he's alive. There was a long pause. Then Walter added, and they won't want him talking. Emily blinked. He's a dog. Walter looked at her, dead serious. But he's not just any dog. He's trained to detect drugs, locate people, track scents across miles, and he remembers everything. If he was used for something illegal, if he was part of something he wasn't supposed to be, they'll see him as a liability. A knock at the door interrupted the room like a gunshot. Emily froze. Walter's hand moved instinctively toward his side. No weapon there anymore, but the reflex lived on. She stepped to the door, peering through the peephole. Just a delivery man. A plain brown package sat at his feet. She opened the door slowly. Delivery? Someone left it downstairs. No return address? He said with a shrug. Thought I'd bring it up. She thanked him, took the box inside, and set it on the counter. Walter narrowed his eyes. Did you order anything? No. They stared at the box. Emily grabbed a knife and carefully sliced the tape. Inside, nestled in packing paper, was a single item. A photo. She picked it up, and her breath caught. It was a picture of her and Noah at the park 2 days ago. Shadow was just behind. Them, barely visible, lying beneath the elm tree. On the back, written in black marker, he's not yours. Stay out of it. Walter took the photo from her, examining it with a practiced eye. They're watching, and they want us to know. Emily's voice was tight. Should we call the police? And say what? We found a picture in a box. He shook his head. Without a name, without a plate, without real evidence, it's a warning, not a crime. She looked at him, anger rising beneath the fear. "So what, we wait until they come knocking?" Walter looked at Shadow, then at Emily. Number we hit first. That night, while Noah slept in his bed and Shadow curled at the base of his door like a sentinel, Emily and Walter sketched out a plan. "Shadow knows their scent," Walter said. "If we can track where he was dumped, maybe we can reverse engineer where he came from." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You think he can remember a route backwards?" "I don't think. I know. It's part of his original K9 certification." She looked toward the hallway. "What if they're still watching? What if they see us trying to investigate?" Walter didn't blink. "Then let them." By sunrise, Emily, Walter, and Shadow were at the park. Shadow moved differently now, stiff but purposeful, his head lowered near the spot where the SUV had parked. He sniffed once, then again. His body stilled. Then he turned and began walking, not randomly, but with intent. Walter gave Emily a small nod. He remembers. They followed him along the tree line, past the edge of the playground, and into a narrow service road behind the community pool. It was barely used, more a maintenance path than a street. Shadow stopped near a rusted chain-link fence. He sniffed again, then let out a short, low bark. Walter bent down, inspecting the ground. Tire tracks. Fresh, and not from a city vehicle. He reached into his pocket and snapped a photo. Emily stood nearby, scanning the surroundings. Nothing unusual, except for one detail, a discarded latex glove, half buried in the dirt. She picked it up carefully with the tissue. "You think this means something?" Walter took it. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the first thread we pull." Suddenly, Shadow's ears perked. He turned sharply, body stiffening. Emily followed his gaze. A car was parked across the street. Black sedan. Tinted windows. It had been there the day before. Walter narrowed his eyes. That's not a coincidence. Before they could move, the engine turned over. The car pulled away slowly, tires crunching over gravel, vanishing around the bend. Emily felt her skin crawl. Walter placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "They're watching us because they're afraid of what he might remember." Shadow stepped closer to Emily, pressing his body against her leg. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the key. And someone was very, very scared he might open the wrong door. The storm rolled, in faster than the forecast predicted. By mid-afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised charcoal, the wind sharp and unsettled. Rain came in sudden, angry bursts, slamming against windows, flattening trees to their roots. Emily closed the blinds halfway and double-checked the locks on every door. Something about the storm didn't feel right. Shadow sensed it too. He paced the living room slowly, pausing at the window, ears pricked, his body alert. Not agitated, but bracing, as if something was coming and he could feel it in the air before it touched skin. Noah was napping upstairs. Walter sat at the kitchen table, maps and printouts spread before him. "Storm like this," he muttered. "It's the kind they wait for." Noise, power cuts, low visibility. Emily leaned against the counter. "You think they'll try something?" Walter didn't look up. "If they're desperate enough, yes. This kind of weather erases evidence." Thunder cracked, close enough to shake the glass. That's when Shadow growled. Not loud, not performative. A low, deep vibration that came from his core. He moved toward the front door and sat stiff, muscles locked, eyes fixed on something outside. Walter was on his feet instantly, gunmetal eyes scanning the window. Emily peeked through the blinds. A black sedan was parked across the street again, but this time it was closer, in their driveway. "Call 911, Walter said calmly. Emily's fingers moved quickly across the screen. No signal. She tried the landline. dead. "They cut the line," she said, her voice rising. "They knew the storm would cover it." Walter moved to the back of the house and checked the sliding door. That's when they heard it. A scratch. Then a soft, distinct click. The back door lock. Shadow barked, sharp, loud, direct. The sound punched through the tension like a flare gun in fog. Then he bolted toward the rear hallway. Walter motioned Emily back. "Take Noah. Barricade yourselves in the upstairs bathroom. Go now." "But what about now?" Shadow was already at the back door, hackles raised, body low and forward, a seasoned stance that said he was ready. Not reckless. Trained. Emily sprinted up the stairs, grabbed Noah from his bed, and whispered reassurance as she locked them inside the tiled room. Downstairs, the back door cracked open. 2 figures stepped into the kitchen, dressed in rain gear, their faces obscured by soaked hoods. Shadow didn't wait. He launched, not with wild energy but with precision. His body struck the first intruder mid-torso, knocking him back into the pantry. A muffled curse, a crash of canned goods. The second man raised something, long, black, metallic. A tranquilizer gun. Walter moved fast. He grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the wall and swung, hitting the man's forearm before he could fire. The weapon clattered to the tile. The man snarled. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Walter's voice was ice. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and so does he." Shadow stood between them now, growling low, a sound that had once made grown men freeze in place during raids. His body shielded Walter's flank. His gaze locked on the invaders. The man who had been knocked down rose, favoring one side. "We just want the dog," he spat. "He's not yours." "He's not yours either," Walter said. "He's his own." The second man lunged for the dropped weapon. Shadow moved first, biting down hard on his wrist, jaws locked with surgical strength. The man screamed and fell back. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Headlights flickered at the end of the block. "They called," the man hissed. Walter's voice was calm. "Too late for you." The intruders bolted, scrambling back through the door and into the storm. Tires screeched a second later. Shadow didn't chase. He stood at the threshold, soaked and panting, his gaze tracking the fleeing car as if memorizing every move. The sirens grew louder. Emily rushed downstairs, Noah in her arms. She froze at the sight of the overturned kitchen, the dented floor, the still wet paw prints. "Is he okay?" Walter nodded. "He saved us again." Shadow turned toward them. His tail wagged once, slow, deliberate. The police arrived moments later. Detective Ramirez stepped into the chaos, taking notes, photographing prints, bagging the tranquilizer gun. "You were right," he told Walter. "This wasn't just about a lost dog." Walter crossed his arms. "It never was." Ramirez looked at Shadow, who was now lying near Noah's feet, body relaxed, eyes steady. "Mind if I bring someone by tomorrow?" Ramirez asked. "Someone from the K9 unit. He might recognize the handler ID burned into that collar." Walter nodded slowly. "Bring whoever you want. Just don't underestimate him. That dog remembers everything." Ramirez offered a small smile. "I believe it now." As the officers cleared out, Emily collapsed on the couch. Noah nestled beside her. Shadow lay on the rug again. Same spot, same posture. But something had changed. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was standing guard. That night, long after the wind had died down, Emily passed through the darkened hallway with a blanket in her hands. She paused at the sight of them. Shadow lying near the door, Noah curled beside him, one tiny arm draped over the shepherd's neck. Neither moved. But when Emily stepped closer, Shadow opened his eyes and looked at her. Not with fear. With purpose. He was home. For now. But she knew deep in her gut something bigger was coming. And this dog, They hadn't just rescued him. He'd come back for a reason. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the house still held the weight of the night. Emily didn't sleep. Neither did Walter. They sat at the kitchen table over 2 untouched mugs of coffee, the same spot where the fight had happened just hours before. The overturned chair was still lying on its side. The cast-iron skillet sat in the sink, blood crusted around the rim. Shadow lay near the door, watching everything with unblinking intensity. At 8:07 a.m., a knock came. Detective Ramirez walked in, followed by a woman in a dark navy windbreaker. Her short blonde hair was slicked back from the mist, and her expression said she hadn't come to chat. "Emily, Walter, this is Special Agent Dana Hoyt from the Department of Defense." Hoyt didn't waste time. Her eyes landed on Shadow, and something in her posture shifted. Not fear. Respect. "I need to see his tag," she said. Walter retrieved the metal disc from the counter. Ramirez had already dusted it for prints. Hoyt took it and held it up to the light. There was a subtle DOD engraving, half ground off. She turned it over and muttered, "Kilo 74 Zulu." Her face hardened. This dog was classified. Very few units worked under that designation, and all of them were assigned to black level retrieval. Emily stared. "Retrieval?" Hoyt nodded. K-9s trained to assist in sensitive recovery operations, hostages, data intercepts, and sometimes bodies. Walter leaned in. "Then why was he left in a ditch? Who tried to take him last night?" "That's what I intend to find out," Hoyt said. Shadow had not moved, but as Hoyt approached him, he sat up straight, alert, ears forward. She knelt beside him slowly and held out the tag. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "K74Z, somewhere inside, you know what that means." Shadow's ears twitched. Then he looked away. Hoyt stood. "He knows, but he's not ready to show it. Not yet." Then she added, "The fact they came for him means he's seen something. Or knows something." Walter's voice was low. "They want to erase it." Ramirez frowned. "So what now?" Hoyt tapped her chest. "I'll get clearance. I'll dig into deployment records. But we need him. On his terms. If he decides to cooperate, this entire puzzle might come apart fast." That night, something shifted. Shadow waited by the garage door after dinner, tail twitching. Emily followed, hesitant. He looked at her once, then barked once, sharp and clear. Walter opened the door. Shadow bolted out into the darkness, not in panic, but with purpose. They followed. He led them down the street, around the old water tower, past the field where children used to play, and stopped near the chain-link fence behind the closed-down mill. He stood frozen, ears forward, body rigid. Walter scanned the ground. "He's not looking for someone." Emily caught it first. "He's waiting." Then, from the shadows, a car rolled up. No headlights. Silent. Walter reached for his concealed pistol. But before he could react, the car door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't dressed in black. He wore military fatigues, old and worn, his beard thick and grey. But his voice, when he spoke, cracked the night open. "Kilo 74 Zulu," he said, softly. "Shadow." The dog didn't move. The man stepped closer. "I thought you were dead. They told me you didn't make it out of Kandahar. They told me they buried you." Emily's pulse pounded. "You know him." The man looked at her. "I trained him. I deployed with him. I lost him during a blackout op 3 years ago. The op never made it to record. No one was supposed to know we were there. And when things went sideways, they abandoned the whole team. We were lost in action." Walter stared. "So why now? Why come back?" The man swallowed hard. "Because he came back, and because someone out there is killing anyone who survived that mission." Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from Shadow's chest. He turned sharply, gaze locked into the woods. Flashlight beams flickered between trees. They were not alone. Emily whispered, "It's them." The man snapped into motion. "Inside the mill, move." They ducked through a broken fence panel, rushing inside the crumbling structure. Shadow didn't hesitate. He darted ahead, led them through pitch-black corridors with practiced precision. Shots cracked outside. Shadow halted at an old control room door and barked twice. Walter forced the rusted knob. Inside was a shattered console and a locked cabinet behind steel mesh. Walter raised a crowbar from the corner and wedged it under the panel. It popped open with a groan. Inside, a hard drive. Old, scorched, but intact. The man grabbed it, his hands trembling. This has footage, logs, proof of the op, names, who lived, who died, and who sold us out. Emily whispered, "That's why they're hunting him, because he knows where it was left." Shadow stood at the doorway, guarding, unblinking. Outside, tires squealed. More lights, boots on gravel. The man held out the drive. "You need to run." But Shadow didn't move. Walter touched his back. "We don't leave him. Not again." Shadow turned to face them, and for the first time since they found him, he barked and ran toward the noise, not away from it. And this time, they followed him. Together. The air inside the mill was damp and metallic, carrying the scent of old engine oil and wet concrete. Shadow stood in the doorway, tail stiff, his ears pivoting with surgical precision. Outside, the sound of boots crunching gravel was growing louder, measured, deliberate. Whoever they weren't in a hurry. They thought they were in control. Walter positioned himself near the broken window, firearm ready. Emily crouched behind a stack of decaying crates, eyes locked on Shadow. The man in fatigues, Jason Cole, now reintroduced as Sergeant First Class Cole, connected a small cable from the old hard drive to his phone. A green light blinked once. He whispered, "It's encrypted. Military grade, but there's a key embedded, if it wasn't scrubbed. We'll know in 90 seconds. Shadow gave a short, low bark, the kind that said, "Incoming." Outside, tires screeched. Another vehicle had arrived. Jason looked at Walter. "They brought reinforcements." Walter glanced at Shadow. "Then they still don't know what he's fully capable of." Shadow took 2 steps forward, then abruptly halted, ears pinned, head angled. And then, a bark. But this one was different, urgent, almost a warning, aimed towards the east wall. Jason frowned. He's not reacting to them. Shadow barked again and rushed past a pile of collapsed scaffolding. Emily followed, flashlight in hand. Behind the crumbling drywall, something gleamed, barely visible. A door. Jason reached it and kicked it open. A stairwell led downward, the concrete steps disappearing into darkness. Shadow didn't wait for them to decide. He vanished down the stairs. Walter hesitated only a second. "Stay behind me," he told Emily, and followed. Below was a bunker, unfinished, unlisted, likely part of an aborted Cold War storage site. Rusted filing cabinets stood toppled over in the corners, surrounded by mouldy tarps and broken crates. But Shadow wasn't sniffing aimlessly. He was pacing tight circles around a sealed hatch in the ground, growling. Emily stepped forward. "Something's in there." Jason knelt by the hatch. A faded label read, "Echo Storage 03. He turned to them. "This isn't on any map. Echo units were disposable compartments." Walter understood. "Black site records." Jason nodded. "Or bodies." A low rumble vibrated through the walls. Above, gunfire erupted. Walter turned to run back, but Shadow leapt in front of him, blocking the stairway, barking furiously. Emily shouted, "He's telling us to stay." To wait. Walter hesitated, then grabbed Jason by the collar and yanked him back. The ceiling above the stairwell exploded downward as a fragmentation device detonated. Concrete dust filled the air. They all hit the ground. Shadow was still standing, his eyes locked on the hatch. Emily coughed, eyes stinging. That was meant for us. They tracked the signal. Jason's voice trembled. The hard drive, it pinged a location. Then, from behind the hatch, came a sound none of them expected. A soft, thudding knock. 1, 2, 3. Shadow froze. Jason's eyes went wide. That's the code, tap code. He scrambled forward and twisted the wheel on the hatch. Inside, barely conscious, was a man, mid-30s, pale, shivering, and chained to a pipe. He whispered hoarsely, Echo 4. Sergeant Miles, they buried me down here. Shadow let out a low whine and stepped forward, slowly, reverently. The man looked up and smiled weakly. Shadow, you remembered. Jason unshackled him. What the hell happened? Walter demanded. Miles coughed blood. They knew we survived Kandahar, but we had eyes on something we weren't supposed to. Not just drugs, bioweapons, and names, senators, contractors, people wearing American flags who didn't want to be seen. He handed Jason a second drive. This one, it was never meant to surface. Emily stood speechless. Jason asked, How long were you down here? 14 months. Walter swallowed hard. They didn't kill him. They kept him, in case they needed leverage. Footsteps above again. Closer now. Shadow growled, deep and guttural. Jason stood. This isn't a firefight we can win here, but we have the evidence. We move now. Walter nodded. What about extraction? Jason pulled out a satellite phone. If they didn't jam it, I have one call. But it was Shadow who made the next move. He darted toward the west wall, barking 3 times before pawing at the cinder blocks. Jason followed and found a narrow passage, once part of a ventilation system. Good boy, he muttered, voice cracking. They helped Miles through the crawl space first, then Emily, then Walter. Shadow came last, turning once to look back at the smoke creeping down the stairwell like a living thing. They emerged behind a collapsed billboard 100 yards beyond the mill. Jason dialed. This is SFC Cole. We have 2 Echo survivors, live, 2 civilians. Proof of Operation Foxlight. We need airlift. Now. Silence. Then a voice. Copy. Confirming your geo. Extraction inbound. 15. As the rotor blades thundered in the distance, Walter looked at Shadow, now leaning into Emily's lap, eyes heavy but still alert. You knew, from the start, he whispered. Jason nodded. He never forgot his mission, even after they left him for dead. Emily held Shadow's paw. They didn't deserve him, but we do. Shadow closed his eyes, not in weakness, but in peace. The storm wasn't over yet, but they had the proof. They had the man. And they had Shadow, the one who remembered what everyone else tried to forget. The helicopter rose above the smoking treetops, cutting through the icy wind as if urgency had shape. Inside, the cabin buzzed with tension and rotor hum. Jason sat beside Sergeant Miles, who had drifted into a shallow, guarded sleep. Emily wiped the soot from her face, her hand never leaving Shadow's thick fur. Walter leaned forward, reading the drive's data off Jason's screen. These aren't just names, Walter said. They're movements, hidden transfers, ghost shipments, some of them routed through our town. Jason didn't look up. This is what Echo Unit died for, what Shadow tried to warn them about in Kandahar. Emily blinked. Wait, Shadow tried to warn them? Jason gave a slow nod. He detected the chemical signature, something buried under the hospital ruins. He barked, clawed, tried to drag Sergeant Miles out. No one listened. The next day, the explosion. Walter looked at Shadow, his coat singed, his body stiff with exhaustion, but his eyes still alert. So he wasn't just following scent, he was finishing a mission. Jason whispered. No. He was saving the last man who believed in him. The radio crackled. Eagle 9, divert immediately. You're being tracked. Coordinates compromised. Repeat, you've been compromised. Emily's breath caught. How? We were just cleared. Jason's face went pale. The phone. The call I made, it was a ping decoy. They used it to mirror our channel. Walter lunged for the cockpit. Get us out of line of sight, now! But it was too late. A sharp whistle cut the sky, and a second later, the explosion rocked the tail. The world spun. The cabin slammed sideways. Emily grabbed for Shadow, screaming his name as the back door ripped open. Then, black. She woke to silence. Ash drifting in the morning air like snowfall. One rotor blade still spun weakly, half buried in the creek. Walter was groaning nearby, his arm twisted but alive. Jason coughed blood, hunched over Miles. But no sign of Shadow. Shadow? She croaked, dragging herself to her knees. Shadow! Then, off in the tree line, a rustle, and there he was, limping. Blood smeared down his flank. His eyes locked on Emily's. He trotted forward, slow but steady, dragging something behind him. A tactical pouch. Jason scrambled to it. That's mine. Inside wasn't just the second drive. There was a satellite relay, still intact. Jason fumbled to activate it. If this links, we can expose everything, all of it. But I need... Shadow barked. Once, then leapt onto the wreckage. From his perch, he stared straight ahead, ears flat, growling. Not in pain, in warning. Men were coming. 4 figures, camouflaged, armed. Emily reached for the emergency flare gun. They're here to finish it. Jason tapped furiously. Give me 30 seconds. Walter stepped in front of him, pistol raised. But it was Shadow who moved first. He bolted toward the left flank, looping wide. The men focused on Walter, missing the blur of fur moving behind them. Then, an explosion of motion. Shadow launched from the underbrush, slamming into the nearest man. Gunfire cracked, ripping the air. But Shadow didn't stop. He took 2 down before they could aim. The other 2 panicked. One turned, ran, the other aimed directly at Emily. Bang! He staggered. A final shot from Walter dropped him cold, and then silence again. Jason held up the relay. It's done, he said, voice shaking. The files are out. They're public now. Emily turned to Shadow, blooded, panting, standing but trembling. She dropped beside him, hugging him tight. You saved us. Again. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes closed. Not in surrender, in peace. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of machines. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A single IV bag swayed gently on a hook. Emily stood at the foot of the hospital bed, eyes locked on the curled body beside it. Shadow lay still, wrapped in blankets, one paw bandaged and his chest rising shallowly. His breathing was labored but steady. His fur was singed, but his eyes remained that same. Amber, watchful, ancient, unafraid. Sergeant Miles sat nearby, his arm in a sling, his voice barely a rasp. He's done more than any of us, and he still looks like he's waiting for orders. Jason nodded. Because he is. Across the country, headlines were already breaking. Top-secret intel leak exposes military corruption, names, faces, accounts, cover-ups, and one dog who had never stopped tracking the truth. But that wasn't what brought the reporters to the hospital gates. It wasn't the documents, it was Shadow. The story of a retired military canine, once ignored, then hunted, who'd led a small group through fire, betrayal, and ambush, had captured something no press release could. Loyalty. At dusk, Emily stepped outside for air. The sky was lavender, a soft haze of coming night. She closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. But then, a bark, short, hoarse. She spun around. Shadow stood on all fours inside the room, weak but upright. His tail barely wagged, but it wagged. By morning, the photo had gone viral. Shadow, standing at the window, nose against the glass, with the sunrise pouring through him like light through stained glass. 1 week later, they gathered in the town square, not for a press conference, not for medals, for a retirement, but this time, not in silence. Walter stepped up first. He's not just a soldier, he's not just a dog. Shadow is a witness, to who we are when no one's looking. Sergeant Miles saluted. He didn't bark to be heard. He barked to save lives. Jason, now reinstated, stood with his hand on Shadow's shoulder. He never gave up on us, even when we gave up on him. Emily approached last, kneeling before the crowd. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Shadow's old collar, still charred at the edge, the metal tag melted slightly from the explosion. She clicked it open, removed the retired plate, and replaced it with a new one. One word. Honored. Shadow blinked slowly, then rested his head against her leg. No barking, no fanfare, just truth. Back at home that night, Shadow curled up on the porch beside Emily's boots. A light breeze rustled the wind chimes. Jason leaned against the railing, coffee in hand. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe the truth doesn't need to roar?" Emily looked down at Shadow. "No," she whispered. "Sometimes it just needs to be trusted." And for the first time in a long time, the town slept without fear. Shadow had seen too much to ever forget, but he finally closed his eyes. Because now, someone was watching over him. If this story moved you, and you believe dogs like Shadow deserve their stories told, please support our channel. Subscribe to German Shepherd for more real-feel stories of loyalty, truth, and the heroes who don't wear capes, just fur.